used to stutter. I've worked on it very hard, and somebody said to me not long ago, have you stuttered all your life? And I said, not yet. No matter what you've done, you haven't done it all your life yet. My parents did put me into speech class when I was a little boy because they didn't know what else to do. And I've improved a lot to the point that it only crops up every time I talk, and that's very good progress for a kid who flunked show and tell. I mean, with me, I did the show and show. I learned how to say a Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers without stuttering, but it was so rare that it ever cropped up in normal conversation. I could never use it. I think the only reason that you all elected me vice president was because you wanted to hear me make an acceptance speech, and you knew that wouldn't be very easy. So I want to thank you. I have no recollection of being vice president. I don't even know how it happened. I do remember when I first started to think I could be a speaker, I was very slow, and I remember I was up here one time going slowly, and I heard somebody say, what's next? And I heard the other guy say tomorrow. And so I knew I should hurry up, you know. I'm also aware that many of you guys in the room made severe fun of me when I stuttered. Touch and Colasino, and I'm just happy to know now that some of you are beginning to pee like I talk. And it's very satisfying for me. In the 8th grade, you couldn't get out of 8th grade without getting a speech. Touch helped me work on talking about, I was raising pigeons at the time. And pigeon is still a terrible word for me to say. And I was up trying to do that, and I couldn't get it out. And Bob I'm trying to get the mother pigeon, opens the baby pigeon's mouth and squirts in, and Touch is up there going, and I'm dying, I can't get it out. Those are all funny. One thing that I decided that I could do really well was to sell Bibles. And I went door to door. I didn't want to do it at first, but I didn't have any. I had some spare time, and my technique is to go to the door, knock on the door, and they come, and I open it up to the early part, and I say, in the beginning was the Word, and then I stop and I say, do you want me to continue to read, or do you want to buy the Bible? And most all of them bought the Bible, and I did so well that my accountant says, you better form a corporation. So I formed a corporation. I made my 86-year-old father the CEO, made my wife the vice president. I was president. Made our 5 children board of directors, put all 9 of our grandchildren on the board. Now, we have a big board, and it was really good until the first quarterly meeting. They tried to squeeze me out, and I should have suspected something when one of the grandchildren came up to me and said, Grandpa, can you imitate a frog? And I said, I suppose so, but why? And he says, well, Mom says when you croak, we're all going to be rich. And the easiest thing that I ever did was become a Catholic. I was about this big, and they dunked me down in the water, and I couldn't look back up and say I'd like to be a Presbyterian, or because Catholics have to go to confession, and I grew up in Iowa in a small town, and the priest knew everybody by the sound of their voice. And one of the things with the Catholic religion, probably every religion, but you're taught very early on that you're rotten, and Some of you were taught that too. The Catholics go a little beyond that. If you just sit on your porch and think about doing something and you really want to do it, that's a sin. You can just sit there. I could do 100 sins and never leave my porch. And you know, then I'd have to go every Saturday to confession. And well, when he knew your voice, you know, what you tried to do is you disguised it, right? Except if you stuttered. Let's narrow it down a little bit. And I got in there and I couldn't get anything out. I mean, it used to take me an hour and 20 minutes to get in there. I tried to get in first so I could get out before anybody else got there. And I'd be in there and the lines would build up out there. And all the girls were wondering who the big swinger was. I could have just lived up to my reputation. Along in a bottle. You know? Didn't do anything, I just thought about it. Nice to see Father Ring tonight because I told him that because of him, I learned how to stutter in Latin. And sophomore Latin class was showtime for the rest of the kids when Father Ring would call on me to conjugate the verb ero, aris, arit. And although I did it better then than I used to do as a sophomore, and Jerry McGlynn, who used to go to school here and went on to Creighton Prep and has now died. He died in 1995, but he was a great friend of mine, and McGlynn thought I was the funniest thing since sliced bread, and when I start to conjugate the verbs, he fell off the floor. Father Ring, I know down deep, wanted to laugh also, but bless his heart, he did not, so that worked out. I was flunking penmanship because Sister Clement was beating on my finger. It wasn't that I couldn't write, I couldn't hold the pencil. But Father Osnick made us give speeches. We didn't know anything about sex. I mean, when you think about it, compared to the kids today, our kids growing up and our grandchildren, we couldn't go to any movies where we could learn about sex because it wasn't there. We couldn't read a book. There was absolutely nothing in print about sex. And I tried to learn a little bit about it in the Beaver Theater, but there's nothing happening there but Tom Hanks or whatever. I held on to Shirley Anderson's elbow for a half hour once. I thought it was something else. You just don't know. Who told you about sex? You couldn't learn it from your... It was just as awkward to ask your parents about sex as it was for your kids to ask us, right? We didn't. The only thing I knew about sex is what I learned from the other guys, and they didn't know any more than I did. So I was very confused. I was 18 before I knew anything for sure. The only thing I knew for sure was that any minute I was probably going to go blind. They ever would. Well, I'll tell you what, I didn't even care. I thought it was a good trade-off. A few months ago, I got a call at home and from a women's club in our community, and they said to me, we're desperate, and we've come to you. Our speaker, who we had lined up, called a few hours ago, and she's ill and can't speak. Are you doing anything? And I said, no, I'm not. And they said, well, would you come and speak to us? We've called everybody else, and you're our last resort. And some of the best things that have happened to me was when I'm the last resort. So I said, okay. And she says, one thing, we've already advertised the topic, and it's about sex, and we want you to stay with the topic. And I hung up the phone. I said, okay, and I hung up, and my wife said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to the women's club. And she said, what are you going to talk about? And I didn't have the guts to tell her. And my kids gave me a book about sailing, which I was reading. I said, I'm going to talk about sailing. And she said, you don't know anything about it, sailing. I said, I'm reading up on it. And I went and I gave the speech, and it went great. I got a standing ovation, and I came home. And unbeknown to me, a friend of my wife was in the audience and called her and said, Jim really did a great job on that speech. And my wife said, that surprises me. He doesn't know anything about it. And she said, furthermore, he had to read up on it to do it. And then she said he only's done it once. And that a time he vomited. And he lost his hat. I can't believe what my grandchildren know about sex and words that that's frequently over. Condoms. I didn't even know how to say the dang word. Now it's on LA Law and all the different things, you know, and I was so naive about sex growing up in Iowa that I used to sneak out behind the barn and do nothing. But now they have this. I could never go in and buy them. I used to hand the pharmacist a note because I could never get it out. The lines would build up if I was in it. Now you got displays all over the stores and everything. A friend of mine bought a gross on a Friday, and he's an accountant and a banker, and he went home and counted them. Only had 143, and he went back on Monday and said, you shorted me one. I only had 143. The druggist said, I hope I didn't spoil your weekend. If you remember back to the war years, when you began to drive, you could get your father's car if you got a few gas stamps and you saved them up. And I had a gas stamp one time, and a friend of mine who was older said, I can fix you up with a girl a little bit older that wants to go out with you. Okay, so I took her out. I got a couple gallons of gas in my dad's car, and we went to the movies. What else did you do? We went to Reed's, had some ice cream, and then I said, well, what would you like to do now? And she said, I'd like to go all the way. I didn't know where all the way was. And I knew I didn't have enough gas to get there. It had to be at least out by Fort Dodge somewhere. So I just took her home and came into school the next day and asked Al Meyer and Joe Crawford, a couple of Eagle Scouts, you guys know where all the way is? And they got the map out and started looking. Groom said it was somewhere in Indiana. McCluskey knew, but he wouldn't tell us. I learned the other day in USA Today that men can now catch AIDS off a toilet seat. That's shocking news. The way it happens is if you sit down before the guy ahead of you gets up. So be on your toes when you go in there, you know? Jerry Groom didn't know anything about sex when he got married. He was an athlete, and he just played sports and hardly ever dated, and finally got married, and on his wedding night, first time his bride touched him in a private place, he turned his head and coughed. We're into genetics now very strongly. Maybe you don't know this, but they've crossed a pit bull with Lassie. What they have is a dog that'll chew off your arm but run for help. So that's kind of good news, isn't it? I learned that I was a good athlete, for which I thank my parents. That's a condition of genes for the most part. Um, I, uh, I was a halfback, and I operated on the principle that what you couldn't catch, you couldn't hurt. And um, I didn't have to have anybody write a book to run to daylight. I just did it, you know. And had competitive speed, is what Chuck Noll says Franco Harris had. That's when they're chasing you, you can really move. And I did that, very good. And I went to a school that was very well known academically, and they recruited far and wide, and I started out as a running back. They had a requirement like Pitt does, that everybody has to pass a foreign language. Like at Pitt, it was English, and and we had a lot of guys flunking out, and in my sophomore year, the coach said to me, "You're the only guy back that knows the plays. We're going to make you the quarterback." He has never heard me talk, and I did very well in the practice because all I had to do was, you know, he called the plays. But when the first game started, I revolutionized football. And then I'm the very first person, I don't get any plaques for this, but I should. I started hut, hut, hut. It's true. Before me, it was one hut. Just everybody went on one hut. And then we didn't know, nobody knew when to go, because I could do 4 huts or 5 huts or 2 huts. And the center just, after a while, everybody learned not to go till the ball was snapped. Normally you teach the defense that. I had to teach our offense. And so we set all kinds of records. I set the record that's in the NCAA books for the most yards penalized for too much time in the huddle. That's never going to be broken. I could never get the play out, and the fullback's job was to hit me on the helmet when I sustained more contact in the huddle than and you know, when you start to lose, your things start to go bad. Like the Jets this year. They were on a roll, and then in November, they just started losing. Some turkeys had better Novembers than the Jets, you know, but you begin to expect the worst. And our coach started to expect the worst. He carried a little card in his wallet that said, "In case of an accident, I'm not surprised." And about the 5th game, he started getting really down, and he said something like, before we took the field, "If we receive, for God's sakes, recover the fumble." He said, if we kick off, block their extra point. You know. And now get out there, you know. And we lost all our games, and about the last game, he said, "We got to do something to get respectable," and I'll make this kind of brief because I'm probably getting close to being out of time, but they gave me a lot more time to talk than everybody else because it takes me longer. But we practiced 4 plays all week, and all I had to do was hold up one finger, and that meant 4 plays. The first play was the left halfback up the left side. The second play, fullback right up the middle. Third play, he said, was the right halfback up the right side on the 4th down punt. Wasn't anything very tricky about that. And we always used to run to our right, because most teams back in those days ran about 80% to the right. But and so we ran this very first play. We received, and like the coach said, we recovered the fumble. And we were on the 5, which was very customary for us to be. And I held up one finger, and we snapped out of the huddle with enthusiasm because we were going to do something we knew what we were doing. And I handed off to the left halfback, and the biggest hole he ever had seen opened up, and he was in the open. He would have scored a touchdown, but he had never been in the open before. And besides that, he was in no kind of shape to run 95 yards. We didn't practice that, you know. And we really didn't know why there was a hole, because nobody blocked until the season was over. We learned the tackle on offense on the left side was a cross-eyed. And when he got down in the stance, his eyes crossed over to the right. And everybody knows that the defensive players try to read the eyes of the offense to see who's pointing. Well, every game before we was pointing right where we were going, and so we foxed them up and went to the left, but we didn't know that. It wasn't planned. The cross-eyed guy was also the javelin thrower on the track team. He didn't win very much, but he kept the crowd on its toes, you know. And so our guy ran as far as he could, and he collapsed on the 5. And then now we're going to run the second play, the fullback up the middle, and we had one other thing we did that used to tip off the play. Whichever back it was whose turn it was to carry the ball, he turned white. And we had 3 black backs, and everybody knew it was the fullback, and he got creamed. He lost about a half yard. And third play handed off to the other right halfback, who was now white, and they creamed him, but he fumbled, and it bounced around, and our right end recovered on the 1. The 4th down, I was the punter. I kicked it clear out of the stadium. It cleared the parking lot. And our coach was a big guy. He called me out and he said, "What were you thinking about when you kicked that ball?" And I said, "I was thinking I'm playing for the dumbest coach in football." Some of the recruiters that I've met and know have told me some interesting stories. One recently was trying to assess a recruit's brightness and said, "Have you ever taken any calculus?" And he says, "No." I said, "I get all of that I need in the milk I drink." And so he said, "Well, how do you think you'll do in school?" And he says, "Do you mean academically or scholastically?" So there's some kids in Oklahoma that think you can only play your AM radio in the morning. So one of them, on their entrance examination under who to call in case of an emergency, wrote 911. So there is a gap between what some are capable of doing and what some do. Watching Tommy John sign baseballs reminded me of the fact that Mickey Mantle last year is showing his age. He had some exhaustion and had to go to the hospital. And he told the story that he had a dream that he died and he went to heaven. And he got up there and he met St. Peter and he met God. And God said, "Mickey, I'm glad to meet you, but you've lived such a life, you can't stay here. You have to go." But he said, "Before you go, we have these 12 dozen balls we'd like you to sign." So I had one of my children come home one time and say, "Here's my report card, Dad, and I'm tired of watching TV anyway, you know." All set for me. And then he said, "What do you think the problem is? Is it heredity or environment?" I said, "I think it's heredity on your mother's side, you know." And then he said to me, "Well, sign my report card with an X so they don't expect too much out of me for the rest of the year." I don't think the kids, the young people's work ethic is too good. 2 of my grandchildren want to be garbage collectors because they think they only work 1 day a week. And I don't know. I haven't figured that one out yet. I took them to the zoo. I took 3 of them to the zoo. And to tell you how kids think today, they said, "Okay, Gramp, if the lion gets out and eats you up, what bus do we take home?" So they were planning ahead, and that was very, very good. And I didn't understand all that. We have a daughter that's still at home. She's older than she should be. I mean, she should be out of here by now, you know? Some of you know about that, right? But my wife still worries about her. And the other night, I mean, I don't stay up worrying about him, but the other night my wife said to me, Carol's down on the couch with a guy that we don't even know, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and she says, "I haven't heard anything for an hour." My wife thinks if she stays awake, she can protect our daughter. And so she says to me, "Do something." So I got up, went to the head of the stairs and I yelled down, "It's 2 o'clock." And the date yelled back, "What's the temperature?" You know. It's hard to communicate with these kids, you know. So I yelled back, "Do you think you can stay here all night?" He said, "I don't know. I'll have to call home and find out." So the next day I said to Carol, "Doesn't that guy know how to say good night?" She said, "Better than anybody I've ever been on with." You know. So kids will drive you crazy, grandchildren will drive you crazy. I got 9 grandchildren and 1 more coming, and I'm getting old. When I came up here tonight, my wife used to say when I was younger, break a leg. She now says to me, because I'm older, break a hip. And I think that's a sign of the times. And then our kids keep growing, and you want to protect them, you know, from a lot of different things. And death is a big thing. We had a pet cat that we had for a long time. I forget which one of the kids, but I went to work one day, and the cat got hit by a car. And all day long, cars ran over him outside in front of our house. And you've seen that. It's about this thin. They could call that a sail cat. He could sail him about 2 passengers, you know. But I came home, and Margie says to me, "Our cat got killed early this morning, and the kids are in a terrible state of shock." She said, "Do something, get the cat out of them. But do it with class, you know." So I got the spade and went out there. And while I was doing it, I realized the one was behind me crying his little eyes out, you know, and I said, "Well, don't worry about the cat. We'll get a dog." And he said, "I don't want a dog. I want him back." It was named Kitty, I remember now. We were very creative in our I said, "Well, Kitty, no, I can't get him back, but we'll get him another cat if you want that." And he said, "No, I want Kitty." So I pulled out all stops. I said, "Kitty's in heaven with God." And he stopped crying. He says, "What's God want with a dead flat cat?" Our kids are normally able to handle stuff, you know. We came out from church once, and one of them said, "What's the plaque for in the back of the church?" I said, "That's a plaque honoring all the men from the parish who died in the service." He said, "Which one, the 9 o'clock or the 11 o'clock?" They're very observant, aren't they? How many dads have come home at night and Mama says, "Your son," that's what I do, "your son has been terrible today." And this night I came home and she said, "Your son has been terrible today, and I want you to spank him." So I went upstairs, and here was this little guy hiding under the bed and cowering under the bed. And I got down on the floor. I'm trying to reach him out. And I hear this little voice says, "What's wrong, Dad? Is she after you, too?" Not too long ago, I was on a flight, and I was on the window, and there wasn't anybody in the middle seat. And right before the plane took off, somebody sat down on the aisle, and I didn't pay any attention to him. But as we got up in the air, I kind of glanced over there, and he was one of these. He had on an old kind of a crummy pair of jeans. The kind of kid that looked like everything he ate turned to hair, you know, and. As we were up in the air, he crossed his feet, and I noticed he had one shoe on one foot, and on the other shoe he was barefoot, and that got my attention, kind of. And my wife and I teamed up to have 5 kids. We've got them all the way from 29 down to 15. The first 4 were real close together. Then there was a 10-year gap, and we had the 5th one. We were in Planned Parenthood, but we dropped out there for a while. So anyway, I know how to talk to young people, and I just looked over at him and I said, "Hey, man." "Hey, man." And then I wanted to know I'm really hip. I said, "Hey, man, like you lost a shoe." And he didn't even look back at me. He said, "No, man." He said, "I found a shoe." And And I went to my 40th high school reunion just during the summer. I don't mind saying that. My high school has never had a reunion, so everybody looked very old, except, you know, me. But the girl who you never used to get to first base with is now granting intentional walks, you know, that kind of thing. And the sad thing is you look around and some of your classmates are dead, and you say, holy mac. And I'm talking to one guy, and he said, gee, he said, I miss Andy Trout. Andy Trout's dead. And I said, I didn't know, I didn't know you were close to Andy Trout. He said, I wasn't. I miss Andy Trout. I said, why? He said, I married his widow. And, you know, I'm inspired by stuff I read about old age and what's possible. That sex is possible well into the 90s, and I'm looking forward to that. We're at that age now where you're compatible with your spouse. When you go to bed at night, both of you have a headache. A friend of ours is 92, and his wife died, and he married an 18-year-old. He wasn't very smart, but he did it. And about 2 months afterwards, he called a doctor friend of ours and said, I've got to see you, I've got a problem. The doctor said, I told you you'd have a problem. And he said, no, it isn't the same problem you told me I have. He says, I just can't remember her name. The memory does go. An older couple was on the porch one night, they're 93, and she said, I feel like some ice cream. Will you go down and get me some? And he said, sure. She says, write it down. Never had that experience? He said, I won't forget ice cream. She said, no, I want chocolate sauce and some nuts on the top. Because that's 3 things. You're going to get that for sure. And he was incensed. He says, I will not. And he went down and he found all the chocolate ice cream, chocolate. He came back about a half hour later, and he had a little paper sack. And he handed it to her, and she took out this ham sandwich. And she said, you old coot, I told you to write it down. I wanted this on rye bread. And I've been eating oat bran, oat this and oat biscuits and oat this and oat that, and I haven't noticed that my cholesterol is going down a bit. And now it comes out that oat bran isn't worth a ding-dang, and while my cholesterol isn't down, I run faster, so I'm very happy. I'm very happy about that. Anybody that says that they can do at 60 what they did at 20 didn't do much at 20. When my father turned 60, this is a long time ago, he's still alive. The only products we had up in the medicine cabinet were Preparation H and Polygrip. Those were the only two. 2 damn good products, I'm here to tell you. Just don't mix them up. If you do, you're going to develop a tight walk, I'll tell you. You know. But your teeth won't itch, so you'll be okay. The fact that I don't think I'm old. I mean, I tell my wife I'm like good wine. I just get better with age. And I find lately she tries to keep me in the cellar. I mean, that's a... I was going to suggest we get a couple of corners of the room and all of the gallbladders get over there and all of the prostate problems. And I don't know what the women have because I'm not supposed to know about that. But all I can say is that we probably have our own share of aches and pains, and we're going to have more. And how we deal with that is going to be how much we enjoy life. 98-year-old couple got a divorce in 1987. They said they'd been married since they were 18, so they'd been married 80 years. And the judge says, why now, after all this time? Why now? And they said, well, we've been waiting for the kids to die. So. And I went to the doctor one time, and I came home and I said, "Oh, Marge, good news. The doctor said it's normal for a man of my age for the sex drive to be down about a half." And she says, "Which half? Half where you think about it, or the half where you talk about it?" Had a financial advisor out explaining to my wife, who really doesn't want to know about that stuff, and he was telling her about this and that, and she wasn't really paying attention. And he said, "Well, the bottom line, do you know what you'd get if something happens to Jim?" She said, "Yes, a Doberman." And so I know a 98-year-old or 92-year-old went to the doctor and he said she was pregnant. And she said, "Gee whiz, my husband's 94 and I don't fool around." And she called him and she says, "John, you got me pregnant." He says, "Who is this?" During the cold freeze, when a woman arrived in Chicago and claimed her bags, and she said, "Well, I have my bags, but I didn't get my dog. He's in a carrying case, and I don't know where he is." They said, "That's okay, we'll find him. Let me have your stub." And they looked for 3 days and couldn't find the dog. And then the third day, they found the dog up in Fargo, North Dakota, 40 below zero. That's wind chill. And they looked inside the cage, and the dog was frozen stiff. I don't think his name was Lucky. I don't know, but so they shipped him back to Chicago, where he came from, and they got the VP in charge. Always get the VP in charge. And they said, "We've got to do something." And they sent his staff out into Chicago and said, "Find me a dog that looks just like this dog, little brown spot behind the ear, white tail." They looked for 2 days, and they finally found the replica of this dog, and they took out the frozen dog, put the real dog in the cage, took him out to the woman's home and knocked on the door and said, "We have your dog." And she took one look and said, "That isn't my dog." And they said, they were stunned. "How did you know?" She said, "My dog was dead. I was bringing him home to bury him." I know that sometimes we have good news and bad news, and we always have bad, but I heard bad news and worse news. I got a call from the doctor. He said, "I got bad news and worse news." He said, "What's the bad news?" He said, "You got 24 hours to live." He said, "What could possibly be the worst news?" And he said, "I should have called you last night." He said, "I mean, I got 12 hours?" He said, "Yeah." So he went home. He told his wife, and they cried together, of course. And she said, "Well, what do you want to do?" He said, "Well, I gave up booze, but let's have some martinis." And they cooked up a picture of them, and now what? I like veal Romano with Caesar salad. Okay. Now what do you want to do? I want to go to bed and make love all night. She said, "Well, that's easy for you to say. You don't have to get up in the morning." Does anybody know where Kingdom Come is? Didn't your mother ever say, "If you do that again, I'm going to kick your ass to Kingdom Come"? I asked my sister, "Where's Kingdom Come?" I never did find out. Have we had a good time tonight? Huh? I think so. It's going to be over very shortly. I'm hoping so. I want to get down in the bar. I'm going to look for the woman I met last year. She was in the bar, very attractive lady, and I was alone. And she came up to me and she slipped me her card, and on the back she'd written her name and her phone number and her room number, and she said, "I'll do anything for $200. And I gave her my card and my phone number and went over and handed it to her and said, "Come and paint my house." And hasn't shown up, and I want to see if I can find her after this thing is all over. My time is up. Thank you very much. I get some of my best lines from the kids. I'll bet you nobody in the room can answer this. Where do you find a turtle with no legs? Anybody know that? Right where you left them. And the other one, my grandson said to me, "Grandpa, do you know why blind people don't jump out of airplanes?" I said, "No, Ryan, why?" Did anybody know why? Scares the hell out of their dog. I get the material anywhere I can get it, you know. You have to